And here we are. We have our first of 4 dates for the collaborative walkthrough in the work session. And so the rest of our sessions are going to be on February 15th, March 1st, and March 15th. And so really glad to have everybody here today. Want to talk about our full series outcomes. So this is for the full 4 days. We'll talk about our outcomes for today after this slide, but the outcomes for the whole series is we really want to be able to establish and strengthen our continuous improvement teams and the process that we use for completing our continuous improvement and completing the MICIP. And so the main basis for that whole thing, MICIP is a very team-oriented, it's a district-oriented process. And so we really want to make sure that we have a real solid foundation there. So we're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about that. We also want to just really build that understanding and fluency around the whole process and the use of the MICIP platform. And so a lot of times you'll hear us talk about continuous improvement as a process, and you'll hear us talk about MICIP as a platform. And so we want to be really fluent about both of those things and understand the role and the place for both of those. And then our third outcome is really to emphasize that importance of monitoring and adjusting our plans to actually bring about that continuous improvement. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but I know that for many of the districts that I've worked with and have worked in over the years, that school improvement at the time was kind of a thing that needed to be done. And it was kind of done within a timeline and a time frame. And really, there's a pretty big mindset shift when we're talking about MICIP. And the important, I think, big change around that is monitoring and adjusting and making that whole process really continuous. So we'll get into all of those, but those are the main outcomes for our whole series. As for today, we are really going to work through the MICIP process, as was in the materials that invited you to this. Today is the 101 day. And so we're gonna get into MICIP. We're gonna look at the different screens. We're going to talk about how to get data in there. We're going to talk about some different processes to think about our data. I do have time built in for you to either work with a team if you're here with a team, or to work with other folks that are here as well. But we're really just going to work through that, and we're going to hopefully get up through the establishment of our goals and end targets. We'll see if we get that far. If not, then we'll pick up right where we left off next time. And there's going to be a variety of resources that we talk about today to help to strengthen your teams and processes. And finally, really want everybody today to really think about where is your district right now with continuous improvement and the teams that you have to work around continuous improvement, and where would you like to be? So those are going to be our main outcomes for today. And I think at this point, yeah, I wanted to mention at this point that this is the 101 day. So if you have went through our series the last 2 years, if you have attended our MICIP 101 session at the Continuous Improvement Conference, there's going to be a lot of things in here that are the same. And so the rest of our series, we have lots of new material and we have new speakers and some other really great things planned, but today really is that 101 day. And so I didn't want it to, if you're an expert and you didn't feel like hanging out today, that's totally fine. But I think that there will still be some good reminders for everybody, and some good things for everybody to think about. And if you do have a little bit more knowledge, then you're always welcome to share and help us with that as well. So yeah, who's an expert at this, right, Mike? So just wanted to kind of put that disclaimer out today. This is the 101 day, so we're gonna be going back to basics for today. All right, so just introducing the team. And so my name is Dave Hunt, and I'm the Continuous Improvement and State and Federal Programs Consultant for the Muskegon Area ISD. And very excited to be here. Very excited for this to be our 3rd year. And this kind of started about 4 years ago. Right when MICIP was kind of first coming out and we were first getting some information and the first process guides were coming out, I kind of held something at Muskegon ISD that I just kind of invited anybody that around the state that wanted to get together and just talk about continuous improvement and start to think about this new process that was called MICIP that was coming out. And I had some folks from Dearborn joined that and were loyal, came to that every single week that we held it, and was able to become really good friends and colleagues with Hilda Irani. And so she is part of the team today, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Awesome. And I was just going to allude to that. Welcome, everyone. Hilda Irani. I am the Director of Assessment for the Dearborn Public Schools. And I guess that's one of the pluses of COVID. And when we were remote, I got to work and learn from Dave Hunt and Mike Fine and the great team on the west side of the state. And so we made a lot of great connections. And I hope you find today's session helpful. And please don't hesitate to ask your questions. That's what Mike and I are here to do, to kind of monitor the chat and, you know, support Dave as he presents today. So welcome.
And then my my West Michigan continuous improvement partner in crime, Mike Fine.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's been a pleasure putting the series together, and we like to think that we're having a great impact across the state regarding MICIP, because we're excited about both the process and the platform. And Dave and I do collaborate on several different items, so it's always a pleasure, and just appreciate everybody here to want to better themselves with what we have to offer. So thank you.
And I do see that Ben and Terry are here from the MICIP team. If you want to just unmute and say hi to everybody, we're glad that you're here.
Hi, everyone. Oh, this is so exciting. I love this 101 today. If this is your first time, you are in for a treat. So I'm going to mute myself and just enjoy the process today. This is going to be great. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to say welcome and thanks to the team for putting this together. As Dave said, this is the third year. And when I first saw this 3 years ago, I thought, you know, why limit this to just a few people who were on then? Such a good idea, so well presented. And so just really thankful for the team's willingness to pull all these pieces together and to share it across the state. So hope you have a great learning experience, and I'm looking forward to sitting in the background for this and answering any questions that might come up.
All right, thank you, Ben and Terry. So as you can see, we have a pretty good support crew today, besides just the presentation. And so if there are any questions, this is the place to ask it, and you're able to just put those right in the chat. I'm going to talk just a little bit about that here, about some other ways that you can either show your support if you know some things, or get support if you need it. So as I mentioned earlier, our series dashboard is always going to be available at that bit.ly, bit.ly 23 MICIP collab. And so again, I mentioned that you might want to just bookmark that, and you'll always know where that is through this whole series. And I will be posting the recorded content on the dashboard following each session. I usually get that posted the same day, but sometimes it takes me till the next day, depending on what else is going on in the afternoon. I just wanted to mention that this whole series is free. Everything in the dashboard, everything that we share is all free use. So you're welcome to share the dashboard. You're welcome to share the resources. If you are talking to somebody else and they need the resources, just use them. Just use them and share them. There's no restrictions. I mean, I guess I probably wouldn't be very happy if you somehow made money off of it and then didn't send me some of it. But but you're welcome to freely share all the resources. I mentioned earlier, you don't really need to attend all the sessions live. And so you're welcome to do this asynchronously. I hear every year from people that say, hey, I haven't been able to come to any of the sessions, but I watch all the videos and I've used all the resources. And so that's totally fine. If you find that that your days are busy, it's sometimes you're in school, and I know what that means. So if it works out to do this asynchronously, you're more than welcome to do that. And the last thing I'm going to mention is just to make sure that you do sign in and sign out. Sign in right at the top of our is right here at the top of the dashboard. And that's how you're able to get your sketches. And just the only way that you are able to get the sketches, while you're welcome to participate asynchronously, you can't get the sketches if you're participating asynchronously. So if you'd like to get the sketches, make sure that you come to the synchronous sessions. And then just kind of thinking about participation. please use the chat to post the questions, and especially tips. We have all been using MICIP for a few years. I'm sure that there's people that have used it now and have some good experience with it. And so if you have some tips that you want to share or some anecdotes, or if there's something that we say that you're like, oh, but there's another great way to do it, please put it in the chat. We'll stop, we'll stop periodically to see if there's anything that needs to be discussed out loud. But like I mentioned, Mike and Hilda are going to be addressing any questions that we have right in the chat as we go. And like I mentioned, feel free to crowdsource the answer. So if somebody's asking a question, you feel like you know the answer to it, by all means, go ahead and weigh in. There are many, many resources. And over the years, we have built up here on our dashboard, the resource repository. And so we're going to keep this going this year. It has everything that's ever been put in there by somebody that has attended the series. And so you'll see that there's links to all kinds of stuff. There's links to nationwide resources. There's links to things that people have just made for their district. There's links to things that other ISDs have made. And there's just some really great resources in here. And so if we're going along and you're like, oh, I have something that is just like that, or I made something that's even better than that, go ahead and just post it in here. And you're welcome to put your contact information if you'd like, if they have people that have questions. And you can see that some people just posted some things in and didn't put that. So that's okay too. So would love to continue to crowdsource all the different resources that are out there. And so please use that, one, to access any of these resources, and two, to share resources as well. All right, I think that is it for the logistics. So going to get in and just kind of jump right into things. And we really wanted to start off the series by talking about the sorts of things that kind of have to happen before you even get started, or that are really foundational pieces to kind of understand. And then we'll get into some more of the practical hands-on stuff. So we're going to talk about just what is continuous improvement. We're going to talk about establishing our teams, and when it makes sense to work outside the platform and when it might make sense to work inside the platform. So first off, just going to kind of get into the way that I'd like to say that this is kind of the old way, but I have to say I work with a lot of districts that still operate under this mindset. And I think that this is why I wanted to talk about this first. And so kind of this is more of a school-based school improvement. And what we really want to be talking about is continuous improvement. And so let me kind of explain what I'm talking about here. So in this scenario, what happens is the schools might look at some sort of data, and kind of the timeline that this often happens on is state assessment data is released, and they're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about our state assessment data? And then each of the schools kind of make their own plan about what they're going to do. And then that would get aggregated into a great big district improvement plan that was really, in this case, a plan that was made up of 5 different schools. So each school kind of thought about what they wanted to do, and then it just got kind of aggregated into this big district plan. And this is how we would end up with 75-page, 125-page plans in Assist, for those of you that have been around for a long time. And really, this is a very linear process where it's, we have some data, we completed our needs assessment, and the schools wrote a plan, and then we'd put it all in a district plan. And now, somebody in the central office would say, okay, now I'm going to write for some grants to be able to fund all these things. And really, I remember in Assist that it would kind of come to the end of the year, and I'd sit down with the other principals, and we'd just kind of change all the dates to move everything forward another year. And so this is really, people had been asking for a long time to get away from this system and to have something to be much more meaningful. And so MICIP was really designed from the ground up to be substantially different from this model. And so I want to talk a little bit about what is mainly different. So the first thing that's different about this is that we really want to be paying attention to the whole child. And when we say the whole child, we say the whole school, the whole community. And so that data is comes from a variety of different sources. We're not just concerned about state assessment data. We are really thinking about the whole child, and we'll talk a lot more about what kind of data that entails here in a bit. And then that continuous attention to that. So it's not that we're just going to look at this data once a year and then make a new plan off of it, or just kind of update our old plan. The main big difference there is that we really want to flip that model to say, instead of starting with the schools and then kind of aggregating all the schools together, we really want to flip that process and say, what are the really important things based off of what our kids need, what our school need, what our community needs? What are the really important things that our whole district wants to focus on? We're going to write a district-wide continuous improvement plan. And the name of the plan changed. It used to be called school improvement, and now it's called continuous improvement. And there was a reason behind that name change. We wanted to get away from that school-based model to get to, what is the district going to do? What is the district going to agree on and work toward? And then where do the schools fit into that plan? What activities and strategies are we going to put in place for the whole district? And maybe what are some of the strategies and activities that maybe just apply to, say, our elementary schools, or what's a different strategy that might apply to our high schools? And so we're going to look at a lot of different models for that. But that is really the big kind of mindset shift around this is, I should say, two big mindset shifts. One being around that continuous attention to the whole child data, our whole school, our whole community, and flipping the model to say that this is district improvement. We're going to figure out what's important for our district, and then our schools are going to see where they fit in to that big district plan. And another thing that I would say about it, I kind of have in the model off to the left here, is that the process should be more nonlinear. And that's not to say that goals that you establish won't be there for multiple years. In fact, we hope that they would be there for 3 to 5 years. But it's more to say that if there's new data that comes in that needs to be considered, we should start thinking about that right away and start to see, what does that do for our plan? Are there any adjustments that we need to make? And so that whole piece that I mentioned earlier about monitoring and adjusting becomes very important. And that's really another one of the big main differences. Is more nonlinear. We should be looking at our data more often and seeing if there's adjustments that we need to make to the plan. Maybe things are working really well, and we can figure out some new strategies and activities to put in. Maybe we're seeing that the growth that we thought we would get isn't happening. So what are we going to do about that? So that nonlinear focus is another one of the main differences between those two pieces. So thinking about operating a little bit differently is thinking about that we might have to have our teams operate differently. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit about this continuous, about readiness to work as a district continuous improvement team. And we're going to talk about a lot of different team resources here in just a minute, but I wanted to just everybody do a little bit of reflecting on this to see about where do they think that their team might be on this readiness continuum. So kind of off on the left side of the continuum, this is, you might be new in your leadership role. You might just be starting to develop a team. You may have moved here from a different district, or somebody retired mid-year and you were promoted up into that position. But basically, you're kind of new into the position, or you're just newly forming a team. And maybe your district has kind of been more in that school-based process that I talked about earlier. The schools were really in charge of making their plans, and then we kind of just put those together. And then maybe you haven't had much participation in the PD that's been available for the last few years. And then finally, there's lots of different ways to get involved in systems work. There's the MICIP program. You may have been involved in the blueprint work in the past, but maybe your district hasn't really engaged in a lot of systems work. So that's kind of one side of the continuum. And very rarely is somebody going to meet every one of those criteria. You know, maybe it's like, oh, we're a little bit farther along in the process, but we're starting a new team. So that's why it's a continuum, right? But I just kind of wanted to put kind of what would kind of be over on the left side of that continuum, kind of more of the getting started side. And then over on the right side of the continuum, that's where we really get into, we have a well-established team and processes for that team to meet. We really understand who should be on that team, and we have filled those spots with people that are excited to be there. Leadership is really behind that. We have people with decision-making capabilities at these meetings and participating. And we've kind of made that big switch to say that we're writing plans that are about our district and that are important to our district, and figuring out how and where our buildings fit into that. Also on that right side of the continuum is really understanding those mindset shifts of continuous improvement, monitoring, adjusting, and making sure that we're paying attention to that whole child, whole school, whole community data. And maybe by now we've really had some really well-established and aligned goals that we're on a 3 to 5 year cycle of working through. And we're also deeply embedded in systems improvement work. So again, it's not like a checklist where you have to meet all those things, just kind of trying to establish what does it mean to be more at the beginning of this readiness, and what does it mean to be really well established in this readiness. And so what I'd like to do is we'll just ask everybody to be a little vulnerable here and really think about where you are on this continuum. And I'd like to just do a little chat waterfall for this. And this will kind of help for today for Mike and Hilda and I to just get a feel for who's participating today and kind of where they might be on that. And so at this point, hopefully have been able to kind of think about where's my team on this. And if you could just go ahead and drop a number for that in the chat. All right. Thanks, Jake. Seeing some 1s and 2s, saw a couple of 8s, which is awesome. Quite a bit in the middle, those 4, 5s, and 6s. For those of you that have said 1 and 2, you're in the right spot. This is the right place to be to start thinking about this stuff. And I do appreciate your vulnerability to be able to say that. It's good to recognize where you are. All right. Yep. Yeah, entirely new team and leadership, right? This is, it's good to it's like, hey, we're all new. We're going to get after this. So that's good. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for putting yourself out there a little bit and thinking about that and doing a little bit of self-assessment. What we're hoping to do is, as we work through this process, by the time we get through our March sessions, that you're able to feel confident to be able to move this up. So really hope that you're able to act on some of the things that we see today and think about those ways. What would it take to improve that little self-assessment score that you just did? So that's just a little reflection for today. All right, I want to talk about a couple of resources that are in our dashboard. And I want to say that these are some of the best resources that are out there. I'm super impressed with these things. So I want to share those and share any appreciation to anybody that had a hand in putting these together. So I'm here on our dashboard and I'm looking on our agenda and resources section, kind of under the pre-work. And the first one that I want to open up is called District-Led Continuous Improvement. So we're not going to go through and read these all together and that sort of thing. I want to just give a little overview about what's in them and how to use them. So I'm going to pop open the District-Led Continuous Improvement. And what this does is it really goes quite a bit more in depth to what I was just talking about with making that big mindset shift from a school-based process to having those district goals that the whole district can get behind. And so you can see in the different sections here, I'm going to talk about that importance of the district-led continuous improvement. So it really gets into the why around why that shift was made. And I just love this section too, shifting from a culture of isolation to a culture of collaboration. You know, being in school leadership, it can be very difficult, and why would we not want to really get into collaboration? And so this is a really excellent section here. You know, moving into these different pieces, there's different activities for those. Then we'll talk a little bit more about this balance for continuous improvement. So again, we're not going to read through these, but this is a really great piece to really kind of, if you're one of those ones or twos and you really want to think about what does it really mean to shift into this district improvement, then spend some time reading through this. None of them are very long. They're usually 6 or 7 pages. And there's lots of resources in them. And so you'll see that there's actual activities that you can do with your new team. So if you're just putting a new team together, if you have a lot of new people on your team, if you're getting new members, then there's activities that you can use right in here with your teams. And so you'll see that a lot of the activities are about 20 minutes. And so they're great for an opener for a meeting that you're having, or you could put 2 of the activities together and have a full 1-hour meeting done. So I have one technical piece about this is to actually click and follow these hyperlinks. You actually have to download these resources and open them like in Adobe Acrobat. So if you just try to click on handout 1, it actually will just reopen this if I'm looking at it in my browser. And so if you want to use all the linked resources, you actually have to hit this download button and download it onto your computer and open it from your computer. If you're not super techie and not maybe sure what I'm talking about right now, catch us on a break or when we go into breakout rooms, and we can kind of talk through that a little bit more. But just know you get in here, you're like, oh, I want to see what handout 1 is. You'll click it and it'll just pop the exact document back open. So then you'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, I have to download it. And some of the resources actually have that disclaimer at the top. This one does not. So that was the first resource I want to talk about. Just a great place to really understand some of the mindset pieces, and gives you tools to work with a team to help your whole team, not just yourself, but your whole team get around some of those mindset shifts. So then these ones are all about your team formation. So the first one I want to pop open here is forming a team. And you'll see that it's very similar format to the last one. And again, just popping open down to the table of contents. Really gets in here. What does it mean to have a high quality team? What are the characteristics? How are you going to get that group to develop into a team? What are the team functions? And as I mentioned earlier, every one of those has activities, handouts, readings that the team can do. So I really appreciated some of the readings that were in there. I actually just used some of these resources with a team in my county. And I sent a few of the readings to them ahead of time. And then when we got together, they had kind of already done some of the readings, and we were able to really dig into it. So the articles are really good that they have. Again, just some really great activities and resources to do with your team. So that's all about how to form the team. And this one is about leading and managing change. And there's all kinds of really great resources out there about managing change, but this does it really succinctly. You'll notice that the disclaimers at the top about downloading. So make sure you download it if you want to follow those hyperlinks. And so this really, if you're in your team and you feel like after maybe doing some of those other resources, if they're still not ready for some of those big mindset shifts and they're kind of falling back into more of that culture of isolation, there's some really great stuff here. So not going to belabor it, but just know that if there's anything that you take away today, it's that these are some outstanding resources. People worked really hard to put these together, and the activities are real activities that you can do. I've done many of them with teams, and they're real activities. The readings are very engaging. There's videos to different things. These are some outstanding resources. Please, please, please take advantage of them. It's really worth the time to take a look at them. There's one piece here that I pulled out. This was actually one of the handouts from one of the resources. And this is a really succinct 2-pager that really helps to understand what is the responsibility of our district team and what is the responsibility of our building teams. So one of the ways that I see a lot of districts organize around this is that there's a big district team that gets together periodically. Maybe it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly, but there's a main district team that gets together that's made up of representatives from the different schools. And that team gets together and it does a lot of the work that we just talked about. They're making a really great team. They're thinking about what the goals are for their district. They're making sure that the goals are something that's important to everybody in the district, right? So that's the district team. And then the school teams are the ones that go back and do the work, right? And so they're putting those strategies into place, and they're putting that professional learning into place, and they're collecting perception data around how things are working, right? And so the building teams have a role here as well. And so this document that's just a couple pages long, like I said, it's one of the handouts and one of the other resources that I shared, really gets into what is it that the building team needs to do, what is it that the district team needs to do, and then how do those two collaborate together to make this functional piece of continuous improvement. So it's just another great resource. I really want to just call it out because it kind of does a nice one-pager. If you're thinking about how to organize your teams and what the responsibilities of those teams are going to be, you do not need to make all that up. The work has already been done to help you define those things. So, this is, like I said, these resources I just talked about are just really great. I wanted to call out something that was put together out of MICIP ISD. This is all about team-based leadership. And since we're talking about teams, the first component of the MTSS practice profile is all about team-based leadership. And so what MICIP did was, this is a little self-assessment to see maybe if you already have an established team or you're putting a team together and you're making a new team, you want to figure out what's our current state, what's our desired state, and then what are we going to do first to kind of move toward that. And what it does is it really breaks out the component one into, I think there's 4 subcomponents. Yep. Oh, 5. There's 5 subcomponents of component one of team-based leadership. And it really puts all of the different subcomponents in, and you're really able to, with your team, kind of think through where are we right now as a team and where do we want to be? And so what's the first thing we're going to do to get there? And it's a great resource. And it can be really difficult to get started with a new team if you're new in a leadership position or you've been delegated that responsibility. And this is a great way to make a connection with that. I really appreciate the folks from MICIP that put that together.
David?
Yes.
This is Carlos. I just, we're a partnership district because I have 2 schools that fall within partnership. And so we utilize this tool. I brought all the principals in, and together we laid out, went through this. This tool is amazing, and getting to how you're doing MTSS in all levels. What was great is by having all the leadership there in our performance management meetings, we were able to use 2 hours to really craft this completely, knock it all out. But at the end, we're using this tool to inform our new MTSS director who just come in, so that that person can lead this work forward district-wide. And then the principals then took another form that's similar to this and are working collaboratively to develop that for their particular building, because some of the buildings are more advanced than district as a whole, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, Carlos, thanks for sharing that. It's nice to know, I've used this tool, and it's nice to hear other people that have used it, to know that it's really a practical thing. And I heard him mention, he said, they took about 2 hours to really dig into this. And I bet at the end of that 2 hours, they had a much better understanding about how things, were supposed to be operating and what they could be doing right now to make a difference. So it's a sort of thing where if you invest the time on the front end, you're going to get a payoff later on. That I'm reading Mary's comment in the chat. So Mary said, this is all great work to blend together. Title program audits ask about MTSS work too. So doing this along the way helps to make program audits go smoothly. Mary, I couldn't agree more. as I mentioned at the start, I'm also a state and federal programs consultant. And so any work that gets done around MTSS is going to have a ton of crossover to lots of other places. It's one of the reasons I really wanted to share this piece. And it's not just our title programs, but 31A and all our different programs. And so the more that we can understand our MTSS processes, where we're strong in our MTSS processes, and where we need to build up our MTSS processes, the better we're going to be. So Mary, thank you for sharing that. So it's a great resource, and I thought that it was just a really great fit with these other team-based pieces. That component one, team-based leadership. So really a lot of work obviously has gone into the MTSS practice profile, and there's a lot of great resources out about that, and I think this is one of them. So. All right, I think that was what I wanted to go through about the team-based stuff. So I'm going to pop back over to our presentation. Thank you, Carlos and Mary, for sharing. Anybody else, feel free to pop into chat or pop in at an opportune moment. All right, so we've kind of talked about that mindset shift around school improvement to continuous improvement, the importance of having a really well-established and solid teams to be able to do that work. And now I want, as I mentioned earlier, when we were kind of doing our rating scale, I said, where are people with thinking about and working on and doing systems work? And so I wanted to lean into that just a little bit more. And so systems work is really something that's very incorporated into MICIP. And you'll hear people say, oh, I was writing some systems goals. Let's talk a little bit about systems. I just have the definition there. It's that series of interdependent aligned processes and people working together toward a common goal to get to our desired results. And there are many, many examples of some systems frameworks. And so we've mentioned MyExcel or Blueprint earlier. MyMTSS, we actually just showed a resource that came from MyMTSS. MICIP, the scale-up program that's working with MDE. There's a lot of different accreditation pieces that really work to get you to think toward systems level thinking and goals. So Cognate being an example of that. But there's many, many other examples. I know that there are lots of nationwide pieces that really work on systems piece. But I guess when I think about like systems work, I really think about how does everything work together? How does it fit together so that we're all working toward the same outcome? And there are a lot of tools and frameworks that help you do that. And I've also seen districts that successfully work on this without any kind of package program. But there's lots of ways to approach it. And just it's one of the pieces about MICIP that I think is really important is how can we think of big systems, like what are the things that we can do at the district level that are going to impact all students? And a lot of time that's going to end up being systemic work. And as we heard from Carlos and Mary, that MTSS is one of those big systems that we can really focus on that's going to have an impact district-wide. We did talk a bit about that whole child mindset. And this was something that I really admired about the MDE MICIP team was that for a whole year before we had the platform, they really worked on this mindset shift and were really able to put a big emphasis on whole child. And so we know this is the WISC model. Many of us are probably familiar with this, but it does talk about that whole child, whole school, whole community, like we mentioned earlier, but also on the equity side, that we're really looking for equity of opportunities, equity of environments, and equity of supports. So a lot of times we hear about equity or equity in schools or equity in continuous improvement. And what we're really talking about are those three things. Are we being equitable with the opportunities that kids have? And you can even build that up a little bit. Are there equitable opportunities at all of our different buildings? And that's kind of that environments piece. Are we providing that place that's equitable for students? And then are we providing equitable supports? So when you hear equity, really think about those three categories and kind of just expand that out a little bit to not just think about the word equity, but those three pieces that encompass that. And that really helps to get into that whole child mindset. So this is, I think, one of the last pre-work pieces that we wanted to talk about today. And that is thinking about the data that we want to have available to us. And I really challenge everybody to think about data a little bit differently. Data, the first thing that pops to mind when we think about data is going to be some sort of assessment data. It might be the state assessment, it might be the benchmark assessments that we give. But when we're making this mindset shift to whole child data, we really want to think much more broadly than that. I have some tools that I'm going to share here in a minute, but here's some of the kind of main questions to ask ourselves is, what are the types and sources of whole child data that we have available to our team to do this work? And then how often do we look at that data? How often is it collected? How often is it reviewed? And then is there a process to review and act on this data? So like, what's our system around data? I'm sure that we've all experienced that data rich, information poor situation where we have so much data at our fingertips, but we're not using it at the right time. We're not putting the emphasis on the pieces that are going to make the most difference. It's just, we kind of get in a habit. It's like, oh, it's January, so it's time to collect X. But what's our system to go back and look at that, and then look at it in the context of our continuous improvement process? That's really what we really want to be thinking about when we're thinking about that data. So there's a few things that I want to look at. And one is this data inventory. And then this piece here, this academics, non-academics, and systems, that's going to come up again when we get into the MICIP platform. So I think I'm going to take a look at this slide here. And just to say, Mike, I can't remember what source this came out of. I like to cite my sources, but I can't remember where this one came from. Do you remember where this one came from?
Actually, Frank located it, and I don't remember. It was from a session several years ago, so I apologize. I do not.
Okay. So if somebody sees this and you're like, I made that, then just let me know. I'll give you credit. So just a lot of thinking around data. It often gets broken into these 4 categories. So you have your demographic data, achievement or outcome data, process data, and perception data. And so there's lots of different things linked here. Thanks, Ben. Yep, might have come from my school data or my CSI. Yep. So again, we have lots of things that are put into all these different pieces. And it made me think back to, I don't have an explicit call out in here to street data, but I think that might be a good thing for me to put in here in the future. If you came to the Continuous Improvement Conference this year, there's a great presentation from the authors of Street Data. Very interesting book, very embedded in this whole idea of whole child and equity. And they would say that a lot of the stuff that's on here is satellite data, right? It's really, we're looking at a real large picture, state assessment and those sorts of things. It's satellite data. And so what they would say is you need to figure out how do you get to map level? And then of course, how do you get down to that street level? And it is actually quite challenging to get street level data. It really requires a big commitment on talking to people, getting groups together, and hearing directly from students, your staff, and your parents and community. So when you look at this in your head, you can kind of, if you've had some experience with with those authors, you can start to kind of categorize these in other ways, like which of this is satellite data, which of these pieces are map level data, and which are street level data. And all 3 levels are important. So they don't try to discount the importance of those other ones, but you really need to know the purpose of those. And so thank you, Hilda. I should put a link into that. And so really understanding the purpose, and then making sure that you're aligning the use of that data to what it's really for, is kind of main piece of that. So I should have put a slide in there about it. So hopefully me blabbering on about it perked somebody's interest. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of different pieces here that we talk about with different categories of data, and we can kind of then subcategorize those into that satellite level, map level, or street level data. And so I do have in our dashboard, I have another resource linked here. And so Victoria Bernhardt is a longstanding, well-established continuous improvement guru. And so this is one of her resources where that's a way for us to start to think about what's the sort of data that we have. And I guess what I would challenge you to do is then once you really think about the data that you have here, one would be to prioritize it. So what of this data that you collect is really used for decision making and has you're able to really figure out how can we use that. So what first is just list everything that we're collecting or have, right? Then the next step is to think about what are the ones that we're really using and kind of elevate those. And then a last step that I like to do on this with this activity then is to, once you figure out the ones that you're really using, is to see what mix do you have of that satellite data, map level data, and street level data. And then if you find that you really don't have a lot of street level data, start to think about, well, what might we be able to do to collect that street level data? The street level data is going to be really helpful in getting down to causation, which we'll talk about later. So, you can look at suspension rates and just seeing the numbers there and seeing that they go up and down isn't going to give you a lot of evidence for causation. Going and talking to kids that have been suspended and talking to the teachers about their suspension practices, that's going to give you that street level data to be able to make those to figure out that causation and think about what to do. So yeah, I think this is when I like to use this. I like to use it as a 3-step process. One is just, it's a kitchen sink. It's everything that we're collecting and have. Then step 2, what do we really use? How do we use it? And then step 3 is let's categorize that into satellite level, map level, and street level data. It'll really help you figure out where your holes are with your data use. All right. So I think that was kind of the first chunk of stuff that I wanted to talk about. So this just kind of, again, this is all that pre-work. This is before you even get started on MICIP. What are all these different considerations? And so, like we mentioned, the platform is a tool. It's a very flexible tool. We're going to show you the different ways that it can be flexible, but it sure can't do all of this pre-work for you. It can't make your teams. It can't make sure that you have great data processes. It can't make sure that there's been some mindset shifts in the district and that you're doing systems work. It can't do that for you. And so I think just know that this work is probably the most important work that you can do to be ready to be successful with continuous improvement. Like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of in the middle here. If there's some or a lot of these things that are in place for your team, then that's time to slow down and make sure that you have those pieces in place. If you try to skip over them, you'll spend more time later trying to get those pieces into place. All right, I want to pause there and see Mike and Hilda, if there's anything that you might add to the conversation that we've had so far. I'll start with you first.
I'll just chime in. We know that there was a lot of resources that Dave shared. Know where they're located, know when you need them, how to access them. And then as questions arise from your team, as you're digging into the data source, I mean, just knowing the 4 types of data is huge, and understanding their purposes and how they can impact the work that you're doing with your district and even your building level teams is a great starting point. So, and know that we're here as a resource and ask questions. That's, I think, the best thing I can suggest. And, it is definitely a learning process. So, trust the process, as Carlo said, and it will come. We promise you.
Thank you, Hilda.
I would say the hardest conversation to have is we have to start backwards to move forward. Everybody wants to jump right into the platform. But as Dave had alluded to, if we don't have certain things in place, we are going to spend far more time trying to go back and correct those deficiencies that we had in order to move forward. Sometimes we have resource overload, but if you have a team in place, you can say, all right, this is what we need. Where can we go find it versus looking at this list of resources to use is let the need drive what resource comes next. So that's kind of the go slow to go fast approach, which we always say, and we have been reiterating that, but make sure you have this stuff in place before you even get to the platform, and you'll be much more pleased with your results.
Thank you, Mike. So we have a lot of folks from ISDs here. We have a lot of folks from MDE here. Just wanted to see if anybody, any other ISD consultants or any folks from MDE wanted to just chime in about kind of this pre-work mindset, all the stuff that we've kind of talked about here. Just wanted to pause and see if there's anybody has any other advice that they'd like to provide. This is me exercising my Zoom wait time. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. And again, if there's any questions that anybody has, is to make sure that you get those in chat. Terry just mentioned that that planning is done by layers of a team. Is that layers or players? If it's layers, I want to hear a little bit more about that.
It is layers.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because
tell us a little bit.
I think one of the mindset shifts that was really hard at first to get our heads around was this idea that plans are district wide, and everybody first kept saying, well, what about the school improvement plans? How do they fit in? And so as we look at successful communication and monitoring of plans, it's really based on layers. So we know that strategies and activities for the most part are done at the building level, and the continuous improvement team, if it's a district view, may exist at central office or a more wider group. And so really think about teams as being layers of vertical and horizontal communication. So planning is not by a small group anymore where we get together and lock ourselves in a room and produce, what did you say, Dave, 125 pages of a plan and
Right.
move on. So that's what I mean by layers of team.
Thank you, Terry.
Yep.
That's a really great reminder, and something that helped us. We were a partnership district as well, and we successfully exited that. So we did a lot of the MICIP work along with that Eat and Risa helped. And Eat and Risa's really big point was having a communication plan. Assign someone on your team. It does not have to be the leader. It might be the kindergarten teacher who attends as part of the team, but have a communication plan where that person is sharing out to the larger group, the community, the stakeholders, maintaining the notes, etc. Because that's where they were saying it gets lost. The team knows, and then the larger group doesn't know. So you've done all this work to make it a team process. I love the analogy of vertical and horizontal communication, but making sure someone is on top of that.
Yeah, Mary, that's a great point. That you have, these diverse teams, right? And one of the responsibilities of that team, the reason that you want to have such a diverse team that has representatives from parents and, different schools and different levels and all that, the reason you want to have that is to get the word out. Right? It's yes, to have that voice at the table, but also to get the word out. And so a communication plan is key there. So thank you for lifting that. The team can work till they're blue in the face, but if it doesn't have the commitment of everybody else, then it's just the team working hard. It's not the whole district getting behind a plan. So that's a great piece. And Mary, congratulations on successfully working through that partnership agreement. That's awesome to hear.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Dave, maybe I'll just kind of reiterate, I think points that have maybe already been made, but I know one of the questions that we got right from the very beginning is, so if you have a district team, do we still need to have school teams? And absolutely you do. There are roles, and in fact, one of the resources that you shared earlier talks about the difference between the school team and the district team. And it is essential that you still do have that you still do have school level teams. They play a little different role than maybe they did in the past, but it's still essential that there be a district team as well as individual school teams.
Thank you, Ben.
I think I got to get in on this. So to piggyback a little bit, another thing that we're finding, good morning, everybody. Another thing that we're finding is that we used to have teams that were called improvement teams a lot of the time. And now we're really leveraging teams that are in existence within the district to work on those systems level focus areas. For instance, if your systems level focus is establishing guaranteed and viable curriculum, you might have a professional learning sequence that's happening that's associated with high quality instruction that feeds that. You might have people who are working in grade level teaming structures with, say, a coach who are working on kind of fine tuning some of those process pieces. That's an influence on your improvement processes. And so in some of my districts, we have district leadership teams associated directly with this part of the process. And all of those collaborative structures are feeding upward to that. So in those districts, we don't necessarily have a school improvement team feeding the district improvement team. We have professional learning communities, grade span teams, curriculum review teams, data teams, literacy teams that are feeding up into that district leadership piece. And then it becomes a function of the district team to track that district priority. And so that teaming structure is really flexible. And then who attends those district leadership team meetings depends on, like what Mary was saying, what those feedback loops look like. So this that flexibility contributing to kind of the systemsness of the thing is becoming pretty important.
And
Absolutely.
David,
And can I, Carlos, I'll let you go here just a sec, but Lindsay brings up like the main, the real point of let's see what I'm trying to say. Like a very practical thing that we're all going to run into. It's like you can only have so many teams, right? And so we're all working with limited amount of time, and there's a lot of these other things to do. So thinking differently about what it means to have a team that's going to feed up into that district level team, I think that was a really great example of that. It's like if you already have operational teams that are doing this work, you don't need to make like a new team. You just need to make maybe your current teaming structure fit into how the systems level piece works. So I thought that was a really practical example for that, and something that everybody bumps up against. It's like, how can I make this? How can I put a new team together when I already have these 10 other teams? And it's like, well, maybe the 10 teams are doing the work that we need to be doing, and we don't need to make another team. So thank you for sharing that example, Lindsay. Glad you're here too. Didn't even see you pop in.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
Carlos, sorry I cut you off there. Go ahead.
no problem. Just that I know for our district, since we're a blueprint district, we use performance management. So we have district, I think we use every opportunity here to develop our leaders, right? So in essence, there's a lot of professional development, a lot of cognitive coaching, adaptive school. We are very consistent with our norms, our working agreements. We start on time, we end on time. We're very, with that whole perspective, I could just say that doing performance management is keeping the current data points that we've identified on the table constantly, and looking at that data and looking at it, it's like a well-oiled machine if you trust the process, because as a result of this, our MTSS has become really a great tool. But beyond that, I think the systems of support for our students, right? So when you look at for mathematics or ELA, science, and social studies, I don't care if you do art, whatever it is, we have a multi-tiers of system support so that we have for every student, every level 1, level 2, what we do, what's the instructional model, and what are the types of support, the tiers of support supported in tier 1 instruction. Then we look at tier 2, tier 3, etc. Through this process, by the cohesion, we've been able to embed formative assessment and business teaching. You understand? And in the conversation here is richer than 3.5 years that I started here. It's taking us a little bit, but I think the MICIP process has really been a game changer to bring it all together and for us to really focus the work. Because I think focusing the work on those core pieces are so crucial, because teachers are asked too much. And today, I'll leave you with this one, because I think what's happening is I see that one of our failures today is the perspective that we want to address pre-COVID problems with post post-COVID problems with pre-COVID solutions. And what it was, some of those things that we were doing were not meeting the needs of our diverse student population and challenges. And so what's happening now with the mental health of our adults, our children, everything that's going on, I think that we need to step back and understand that we need to be looking at, I'm even restructuring our coaching because we have doing a lot on adaptive coaching and all stuff. But now I'm at the point where I'm looking at the staff that I have and if they're going to stay in the profession, we got to do evidence-based coaching to help you to get from A to B. This is the conversation of our reality today. And I just think that looking at MICIP is preparing your leaders for the work, understanding to be proactive. There's also we as educators have to get better in mental health. We're not. And we need to understand that we need to bring the partners at the table who can support our adults. Our adults, many of our adults are suffering and in silence, but that's showing up in our classroom. So I just want to make sure that as we're looking at this process, that we're looking at whole child. The biggest thing for me for whole child is always voice, choice, and agency. And it's the same thing for the adults. And we got to be taking care of the adults, no different than, and if we have not noticed the massive exit of educators in education, we need to realize that the mental toll that the pandemic is really taking up, and that's not going to go away any day soon. So we got to get ready, because if not, who's going to be teaching our kids? Urban schools are noticing already, charter schools are noticing because we can't pay. So we're saying we can't find teachers. I got all these positions, everything else with money and everything else. Nobody wants them. So it's a reality of what's happening here as well. So I'm just tossing it there because I think the MICIP process is a great tool to really get narrowed down and really get to your core and help those teachers who are coming in to stay in the profession and to continue moving forward. So I'm sorry, I don't want to go in another way, but I apologize.
Well, no, I think like what I have taken out of that is that real importance on that. When we say whole child, we're meaning whole child, whole school, whole community. And that is obviously inclusive of our teachers. And so taking those pieces into consideration. Another thing that I heard Carlos say that really resonated with me was that they're getting to a really good point with their structures and their team and their processes, but it took a long time. And so, this isn't the sort of thing that just happens overnight. It's those sorts of things that you have to work on over time. So appreciate that conversation. I think this is really good stuff for this pre-work piece. And we're going to go ahead and dig into this a little bit more. So I wanted to talk about a few things. And so I kind of titled this section beginning with the end in mind. And just to give everybody a little preview of where we're going here, we're going to work for about another 20 minutes. And then we're going to talk about getting into a breakout room and having some conversation, and then have a break. So just so everybody knows that a break is coming up, and a time for you to get into a breakout room to talk to some peers is also coming up. So we have about 20 minutes till we hit that spot. So right here, beginning with the end in mind, I wanted to kind of just show in the platform that if you're brand new into the system, that if you start a data story, the data story ends up becoming kind of one goal. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then also here, I really want to talk about the flexibility and how the goals get set up. A lot of times I hear folks ask, it's like, okay, how many goals do I have to have? And so we're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to tie that into the MDE communication that came out about all active goals and what it means to have all of your active goals in MICIP. So that's going to be kind of this next little section here. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to get into the actual MICIP platform here at this point. And so if you are in our agenda, there is a really great resource that is the MICIP training site. And I'm going to actually be using the MICIP training site. And so basically to get there, I don't recommend opening it just in a regular browser window. Like let's say that you normally go to MICIP in Chrome. Don't try to go to the training site in the same Chrome. It might get confused about like, are you trying to be the training site? Or are you trying to be your regular piece? So go into a private window, a guest session, open a completely different browser, go to Firefox, something like that for the training site. So, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly get logged into that, because MICIP.org. And so when you hit here, it's going to look just like it does when you log into MICIP. We're going to log in with my Launchpad. So again, this is the training site. And so I'm not going to go to my district down here. I'm going to go to my Data Hub login. And I'll actually sign in with the test password that we have here. So it's demo@micip.org. And the password is welcome to MICIP ! So hopefully I typed that in right. And I did. Okay. So so I'm in the training site right now. And so you might say, well, why do I need to know about the training site if I have my own MICIP that I can go into? And I really like the training site just to try different features out and say, well, what would happen if I did this? Or, a new product or a new portion of it got pushed out, like when the monitor and adjust pieces came out. I really wanted to play through that kind of in a sandbox and see what it really looked like before I went in and started typing things into my own system. So it's really good for that. If you want to get in and just try things out and not feel like you're going to mess something up, then this is a good place. Excuse me, a good place to do that. What I'm talking about with this first piece that I said is one data story or is going to end up being a goal. And so if you come in here and this is like you're just getting started and you're ready to add, you were like, I really want to look at some data. You really kind of have to think ahead of time. Where are we going with this, right? Are we really digging into some academic stuff and we're going to maybe want to make an academic goal? Are we really digging into some non-academic stuff? We're going to want to make more of a climate and culture goal or a student engagement goal. You kind of have to think ahead of time before you get into it. Because you might get to the end and realize, oh, this was really kind of 2 goals, and that's okay. You can go back and start another data story if you want to do that. But it's just like I mentioned, you kind of have to start with the end in mind. And so that I've talked to lots and lots of people where they're like, I started making data stories. I have 15 data stories. I don't need 15 goals. And or I tried to put all the data into one piece, and now I realize I really need it to be 3 goals. And so if you make those kind of mistakes, it's okay. It's not going to break the system or anything like that, but just kind of try to think about where are we going with this? And so when you come in and click create custom data set, it's going to ask you right off the bat, do we think that this is something that's more academic in nature, non-academic nature, or systems? And then you're going to go ahead and name it. And so you can name it anything that you want. I'm going to show a couple of different examples and kind of a flow chart here in a minute of different ways that you can set up your goals. So that might help to kind of prime your thinking as you're getting into this, like thinking about what data are we going to consider? And is this more of an academic focus, or, what is it that we're really curious about in our district? And so I'll show you some examples that you can think about as you get into that. But really getting in here, it's going to ask right off the bat, which one do you want? And I will say that this is good to, again, prime your thinking, to think forward as to where I think this goal is going to go. But you're not bound to anything with this. So like if you were to come in here and say, I think that we're going to do a school climate and culture non-academic goal, and then the whole process kind of morphs a little bit and it ends up into a systems goal, nothing's going to stop this from becoming a systems goal. It's just really there to try to prime your thinking about that. But the main thing I just wanted to point out about this is that when you hit create custom data set, this is going to translate into 1 goal at the end. So you can't start a data set and then break it into 2 goals at the end. It follows through on one process. You have this data set is going to turn into 1 goal. So that's what I'm trying to get at with this begin with the end in mind. So I'm just going to make I'm just going to call it climate and culture. And I'm just going to create this custom data set. And so from here, we'll come back and we'll mess around with this in a few minutes, but that was the kind of the main thing that I just wanted to think about right now when I say begin with the end in mind. When you're thinking about the data, if you make a data set, that's going to turn into 1 goal. Okay, so We're going to come back here in a few minutes, but that was kind of the first piece with that begin with the end in mind that I want to talk about. The next one is just to know that you have a lot of flexibility about how you set up your goals. And so I get questions. It's like, okay, so do we need to have a reading goal, a math goal, a science goal, a social studies goal? Not necessarily. If you wanted to set things up that way, you could. But really, there's a lot of flexibility. You can think about it. And that's really good on one hand, if you really know and you have a really good vision for what you want to have for your plan. It can also be a little daunting if you're not really sure what you want to do, if you haven't had a lot of experience with this. And so with more flexibility and more autonomy, that feels good, but it can also feel a little overwhelming. And so I wanted to show a really excellent resource that was created by Calhoun ISD. So there are these goal flowcharts. And so these are just for demonstration purposes. I'm not saying that what they put in here is the best thing since sliced bread. It's this concept to think about that you can think about how many goals you're going to set up and how to structure your plans in many different ways. That's the main concept that we're trying to get across here. And so the first example that they have here is this district worked through the process and they made one big systems goal that they're going to tie their whole plan together in one goal. And so you'll see here that they're going to meet the needs of all students in the areas of behavior, SEL growth, and academics through a whole child approach. That's their goal. And that is the goal that their whole district's going to get behind. And then within that, they had strategies around MTSS, guaranteed and viable curriculum, professional learning communities, and the K-12 reading essentials. So they made one goal, and then they're kind of breaking that out at the strategy level and then the activity level to really kind of get into that. So that's example one. Then in example two, they decided that they wanted to make two. So one was really on kind of more of an academic goal, a rigorous, well-rounded education for the students. And so they put the K-12 reading essentials and the guaranteed and viable curriculum into that goal. And then they made more of a non-academic piece, right? Creating a safe and healthy learning environment. And so that's where they really dug into their PBIS practices. So you can see that the concepts are kind of the same between the two. The way that they decided to break it out and it was different. And so these are the sorts of conversations that you want to have with the team before you just start throwing data into the MICIP and start making a plan, is really to think about what's going to be manageable for the team to look at, because every goal that you have, every strategy that you put in, you're going to want to monitor that. You're going to want to see if you can make adjustments for it. So you really want to avoid what I call like the kitchen sink process here. So again, this one is with two. I'm not going to go through all the rest of them, but just wanted to point out real quickly that they have in this one, they broke it out into 4 different goals. They even had a 5 goals scenario. And here's another one with 4 goals. So I'll just kind of look at this one. They broke this out into guaranteed and viable curriculum, math, reading, and MTSS. So there's lots of ways that you can do this. And these were just a few examples. And again, I don't want somebody to come in here and say, oh, I'm going to choose number 5 and I'm going to have guaranteed viable curriculum, math, reading, and MTSS. Like, they're just samples. And just to really get you to think about this whole idea of where we start with the process does have an impact on where it ends. And really just to kind of think about anything that you put in there, you're really going to want to put stuff in there that you're going to want to monitor and adjust. And when we get to talking about monitoring and adjusting, that's the real work of continuous improvement. And it's work. It's a lot of work for your teams to do. And so you want to make sure that you have a manageable amount of goals, strategies, and activities in there to be able to look at it that closely. Mike, I know that you have used this resource. Would you have anything to add about this Calhoun resource that was put together?
Yeah, if you go to the Board of Education, I think it's flowchart 3, maybe. Next one. Yeah,
Okay.
stop right there. So I got posed an interesting question from a district is we have our superintendent, our board, we have the strategic plan, but then we also have MICIP, and MICIP is supposed to be systems approach. So it really got me thinking is that can we actually merge them? And not every single strategic identified area has to be in MICIP. But what was interesting was it can be flexible enough to do that. And so if you think about MICIP monitoring your strategic plan, which is also in the best interest of all the students, is you have actually built, or the system is actually there to where you can ultimately get to, as Dave said, monitor and adjusting the plan. Instead of having paper pencil trail with the superintendent and board, you have a common system in which that all can be put into, and everybody would be able to understand where they're heading with that strategic plan. So that was probably the most interesting takeaway, was about a conversation I had a year ago. And then Calhoun kind of took it to life of taking like a local district and what is in their plan and then breaking it down. So I thought that was very interesting. So thanks, Dave, for letting me chime in.
Dave, could I just add as a follow-up to what Mike said, is that we have been working on that process for the last year and are really close to rolling it out, the integration of strategic planning and continuous improvement planning. So within the next few months, actually, we've been doing that with Jackson ISD, kind of piloting it with them. And we'll be rolling that out, including probably a toolkit before summer that describes exactly what Mike is talking about. So we agree that the two processes dovetail very nicely together.
They do. And we'll also be looking, hopefully in fall of 23, platform changes that support the integration of strategic planning and continuous improvement planning. So there's a lot to come.
I muted myself there for a second. Thank you, Ben and Terry. Appreciate you chiming in on that. Hey, at least I didn't get like 3 slides in. Okay, so it looks like we have a question here. Are these examples of ways to build up goals, or is this all in one plan? Could you maybe unmute and
Yeah,
give a little more detail on that?
the reason, yeah, sorry. So the examples that you showed us on the framework, are they, like on page 1, there's that one goal and it's broken apart to different strategies and activities. Is that just like an example of what it would look like with one goal? And then the second page is an example if you had 2 goals, or is this all like different goals all in one plan?
Yeah, so thanks for the clarification. This is the example. If this district decided they just wanted to have one goal and approach it this way, then this is what it would look like with one goal. And then if this district decided, no, we really want to break this into 2 goals, this is what it would look like with 2 goals. So
Okay,
yes.
so that if you scroll all the way down, that's what it would look like if they wanted 5 goals. Am I reading that correctly?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
But one thing to keep in mind that on that very first page, that is a very large system goal. So they went with the system approach. And then if you look at page number 2, is they took, instead of going to a system approach, they broke it into basically an academic and a non-academic. And remember, each one of those goals has its own separate data story, leading to what strategies to select ultimately with the activities that you need to implement. So know that the entire process has to follow through. If you have 5 goals, that means you have 5 data stories.
Yes,
So,
thank you so much. You're
welcome. You're welcome. Yeah. So the reason that I wanted to kind of spend this time talking about that is really because it's easy to get to the end and realize, oh, you know what, we really probably should have broken this apart because now we need 7 strategies in this one goal or something like that. And like, it would make more sense if we maybe broke this into academic and non-academic, for example. But it's really very context specific. And so one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about today, but I recommend that you do a lot of this work on paper first to make sure that you're heading in the right direction, and then get into that. And so I apologize not mentioning that sooner. I will point out a resource here. The guided collaboration document is basically the entire MICIP process in a Google Doc, so that you can kind of work through some of these things before you get into the platform. to make sure that that you're actually heading in the direction that you'd like to head. And so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it has a spot where you can come in and you can actually collaborate and enter the text right in a Google Doc.
Dave, the other advantage of doing it this way as well is that MICIP is not a Google platform. So what happens is if your team is all working in the same place, same time, you can override each other's work. So there is a workaround if you are going to do that, and that is always refresh before you save so that you're gathering all the information that's in the platform. But I would also recommend this paper first because then it makes it so that no one can override anyone else. So thanks for bringing that up, Dave.
Yep. Yes, you're welcome. And Mike, thanks for all your work in putting this document together. So Mike's done a lot of work to keep this updated, and it's always the newest version. So he's always paying attention to the platform and changes in the platform and everything. All right. I think that those flowcharts was an important piece. Okay, so pretty much the last thing that I want to talk about before we get into some breakouts is this whole idea about all active goals. And so I do have the memo here linked. And this actually came out kind of toward the end of the year last year in the 21-22 school year, or excuse me, the 22-23 school year. And what am I trying to say? Look at the date on it. I can't remember exactly what it came out, but it has some information about last year. It has some information about this year. This is linked. I have it linked in here somewhere. Well, it's linked in the presentation here, but I kind of pulled out the important section of this. So I'm just going to read this and we're going to talk a little bit about what this means, and then we're going to get into breakouts. So it says for the 23-24 school year. So these are the plans that we might be working on now that are going to be in MICIP for next school year. Okay. So for the 23-24 school year, all active district goals, including strategies and activities, must be in the MICIP platform to allow for monitoring and evaluation in the platform. An active goal is one that the district is currently trying to achieve through implementation, monitoring, and adjusting. And this includes goals formerly in assist. So what I wanted to kind of explain with this is the last couple of years, it was COVID. We were putting out a new platform. The whole process was changing, and there was a lot of flexibility around what we put in there. And so if you've been at our PDs before, we were always saying, hey, just get in there, just experiment with it, try putting in one goal, see if that works. If that works, go ahead and start building it out with other pieces of data. Well, this is the third year of the system, and we're going into this third year of it. And so now it's really time to get all of our active goals in there. And so what does it mean to have all active goals? It's kind of spelled out here. It's what are the things that your district is working on that you want to make sure that you're monitoring, adjusting, and moving forward on. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this right now because I have a whole section at our next piece. So I'm going to have Ben is going to come in and talk about this a little bit more. I have Al Thomas and Shelley Patton from the Office of Educational Supports is going to come in and talk about it. But we are going to start looking for, are we able, and when we do our consolidated application and apply for our federal grants, are we able to tie those back to strategies and activities that are in our MICIP plan? And so again, I'm not going to go into detail about that now, but I just wanted to say that this is the time that we need to get all of our active goals in the system. And there is going to be some additional functionality that that Ben is going to talk about at our next session that will allow us to, if we've had previous goals that had approved federal funding in them, that was an assist, there's going to be an abridged process, abbreviated process that we can put those right into MICIP for a limited amount of time. And so again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but just know that there's going to be a variety of platform improvements that are going to help facilitate this process. But this is the year that we really need to be able to say, yes, MICIP is representative of all of those active goals that are important for our district to be working on. And so if you've had one good goal in the past, but it really didn't encompass everything, it's time to think about either putting another goal in or expanding out the goal that you might have. So Ben, without giving away all the presentation that we're going to spend at the next at our next meeting, is there anything that you might add at this point?
No, we will go into the details. You mentioned the memo coming out. Hopefully it'll be out this Thursday with the MDE communication that just basically gives a high level overview. And so, yeah, we'll be discussing the mechanics of it on February 15th.
So I think the main takeaway this is kind of in that beginning with the end in mind piece, the main takeaway just for right now is if you've had previous goals and assist that were working for your district and are still important to you, there's going to be a mechanism to, it's not going to be automatic, but you'll be able to take those assist goals and you're going to be able to skip the whole data discovery portion of MICIP and kind of get right in at the goal setting stage. So just know that if you've had some of those that worked before, you don't need to start from scratch and put in a lot of information, a lot of work that you may have already put in before.
Dave, one thing I maybe will add is that we are encouraging districts to spend time taking a look at what they had in from Assist and to discern whether or not they really do need to, what they need to do with those. We don't want them to automatically assume that those should be continued. And there are a number of ways to, to deal with that. I mean, should they be eliminated? Should they be continued in part? If they have individual content area goals or say individual student support goals, might they be collapsed into a systems goal? So there are a number of ways to do that. So now is the time to start having those kinds of conversations so that when the new functionality does become available, districts know where they're going to go with those formally assist goals.
Thanks, Ben. And if you're like, I'm not quite sure what they're talking about yet, next session, we're going in detail on that. So just wanted to kind of plant a seed about that. All right, I am going to jump ahead a little bit here. After the break, we're going to come back and get in and start talking about data discovery. But I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording at this point, and then we're going to talk about what we're going to do in our breakout. All right, so we are back. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so let's see here. We are going to jump into Discover Data. So we're finally going to get into the platform a little bit and get some experience here in the platform. All right. So the Discover Data is made up. So the Discover Data is really the first part in the MICIP platform. And it's kind of that first step. And this is where you're really getting in. You're going to select the different data that you're working on. You're going to think about kind of thinking that beginning with the end in mind. Are we making a big systems goal? Are we going to really focus on academics? Are we going to focus on climate and culture or some sort of non-academic piece? And this is where you start to actually do that work. And I'm going to reiterate that this is it's really good to do this work outside of the platform, especially if you have a new team or you're kind of new working in continuous improvement. I think you'll really appreciate doing this in a Google Doc outside of the platform and being able to work collaboratively with people and have people type in ideas and all those sorts of things. So I just wanted to reiterate that piece. And I think that that's a real strength of MICIP, is that this is really about the continuous improvement process. And then the platform is really the place to go in and make sure that we're just getting all of this, documented. So, let's just kind of go into it. So Discover Data, it's going to have these 6 pieces, and we'll talk about each one of those individually. So the first part is to identify that area of inquiry. And this was kind of what I showed in the platform earlier. And so this is where I'm going to pull over. Hopefully I'm not going to make everybody dizzy with pulling stuff back and forth. So this is where you create that custom data set, and then you ask yourself, all right, what direction am I going with this? What is this thing that we're really interested about digging into and probably writing a goal around? And so this is where you kind of choose that area of inquiry. Again, you can click anything here. It's not going to restrict you in any way. It's just to help you, to remind you that this is going to follow all the way through and it's going to be a goal area. So that's really kind of what that whole picking that area inquiry is around. And so like we talked about, the areas there are academic, non-academic, and systems. So once you select that area and give it a name, then you're really at the step, and this is a very pivotal step of the whole process. You're at the step where you're going to have to think about, well, what data are we really going to want to look at and consider around this goal? And you'll hear me talk about things that we're interested in kind of a lot. So like, what's this area that we're interested in? Okay. And then, so then what data is interesting about that? So you don't have to throw in every piece of data in the whole world into this. You really have to focus on what was interesting, what was in the data was showing you that this is something that you wanted to work on. And so, so really just think about what's the data that is going to be really meaningful around this. We've already talked about the four types of data. We've already talked about the satellite map and street data, so I'm not going to get back into that. But really, this is a pretty pivotal part to the whole thing, is really thinking about what data are we going to look at, because that's going to have implications for a little bit later. So, so why do we put the data into MICIP? So you're going to be able to keep that there and kind of warehouse that information as to what was really important to you when you set this goal. So I mean, we all kind of are living in the here and now, but how many times have you maybe moved into a district and there was a district goal and you were like, why was that even important to them? You can go back and look in the data story to see why that goal was important, or you can even remind yourself, after a couple of years of working on something, like, what were we even thinking? We'll go back and look. You can see this is the data that was important. And as you'll see, here's what we thought about the data and that sort of thing. So it's a really good historical record to put in there. And then you can start to build off of that when you're doing your monitoring, adjusting. And so we're going to talk about that in day 3. Another piece is that you can kind of put all those important data pieces all into one spot. And most teams that I work with have lots of different ways that they try to keep data. We used to keep data in binders and things like that. Now we keep them in Google folders. And but again, you end up kind of with this whole kitchen sink mentality. And so when you really limit it to those pieces of data that were really important for the goal that you're thinking about, then you end up with a nice small set of data that, or I should say targeted set of data that you can really focus on and make some decisions around. So I bolded this last piece because this is kind of like, it's something that you're going to need to know for the platform later. Later on, when we get into the goal setting portion, you're going to set end targets and interim targets for measuring your goal. And you have to tie that back to data that you're going to upload now. So data that you upload now, that's what you're going to set your end targets and interim targets around. So when you think of interesting data, if you're like, you know what, I really want to increase the number of students that felt safe at school. Okay, you're probably going to set an end target around that if that's one of your climate and culture goals. And so you're going to want to put your perception data in that said that kids didn't feel safe, because you're going to want to make an end target around that later. Or if you're going to say, you know what, we really I want our boys to be able to improve on their NWA scores by 10%. Okay, then you're going to want to put your NWA scores in, because that's going to be an end target later that you're going to set. So I think this will make more sense as we work through it, but just know that the data that you put in now, you're going to make a connection to that data later when you're writing your end targets and interim targets to say, this is what we want to improve, and this is how we want to improve it. So that's another reason that you put the data in now. So long story short, put the stuff in that is really important, that you want to see improve, that you looked to inform the goals that you're making. So there are many different ways to get the goals into MICIP, and so, or excuse me, the data into MICIP. And so we're going to look at those here in just a second, but there's actual, there's been a lot of improvements in this area since MICIP first came out. When it first came out, basically you could upload data or you could use My School data. And those were the only ways that you could get data into the system. And so there's now 3 subscription services. So if you're district is part of IDEX, if your district subscribes to Munetrics, or if your district uses our school data, then you can actually enable that feature and you can start to pull reports right from those systems. IDEX and Munetrics are both things that are used statewide. Our school data is a little bit more focused, I think, on the west side of the state. It's out of Kent ISD. Having those pieces in there, I think, really greatly improved the amount of ways that you can get more whole child data in. So for example, a lot of our districts warehouse their SRSS, their student risk screening scale data, in our school data. And before, they had to upload all the reports that they wanted, and now they can just connect right to our school data and pull them in. So there's been a lot of incremental improvements about those. If you are an official partner with MyMTSS, and you're using the MyMTSS data system, you'll see that that is now integrated as well. Lots of ways that you can get the data in from various sources. I still feel like, and I have the statement here, many of the best sources of the whole child data are things that are going to be things that you manually upload, right? So it might have been survey data, or like we said, some other piece of street level data where you went in and you worked with a small group of students that had were having suspension problems, and you were able to gather some sort of qualitative data from them, right? So like a lot of these sources of whole child data are going to be things that are locally created or locally warehoused, or those sorts of things. And so you can always upload your own data in. And so I'm going to demonstrate that here in just a minute. And I think I already talked about this. Don't go for the kitchen sink approach. Really keep it focused on, this is what we're interested in. Here's why we're interested in it. And we're going to set goals around this. That's the data that you want to put in for your data stories. So let's go ahead and take a peek back in MICIP. And so I'm just at this discover data area. And if I wanted to, I could start a new data set, but I had actually started a new one earlier when I was demoing earlier, right? So we started one week and we named it climate and culture. So if I go in here while we were on break, I uploaded a couple of pieces of data. I uploaded our winter student risk screening scale data, so the SRSS data. And then I uploaded some results from our family school climate survey and our student school climate survey. And so you can see that those pieces are all in here. You can go in and you can actually view that data object. And so you can see what it was that I uploaded. So for this, I actually cherry picked. I didn't just upload the entire results. I actually went in and I picked the parts of the school climate survey that I was going to want, that I'm going to want to write data stories about, or excuse me, end targets about later. So I didn't put everything in there, but I was, there was some things in here about like that school is a safe place, or that students are recognized for good behavior. Those are some areas that maybe I wanted to improve on, or that our team wanted to improve on. So I uploaded those specific pieces. So again, don't go with the kitchen sink and don't upload a 50-page NWA report. It's not going to be helpful. Which one of those NWA reports was really important, what was impactful, and what was the thing that you want to improve? Just upload that one report. So you can see that we're working on a school climate goal. And so right now we have student risk screening scale data. We have some school climate survey data. And I just wanted to show how we would put in another piece of data. And so I just have a bunch of different data in here. And so this district did the tiered fidelity inventory to really see how they were doing with their PBIS systems. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click add data. And here you can see that IDEX, MyMTSS, and Munetrics are enabled in the test server. Like I said, there's other pieces that you can enable, and that's kind of a technical piece that maybe I can show if somebody has a question for how to do it. You have to be an administrator, you have to actually turn that on. Munetrics, IDEX, it's not going to automatically show up on its own. You have to turn that on. If people have questions about that, I can demo that later. But you'll always have this upload district data button. And so when you click that, it'll just say drag and drop. So I'm going to come over to my folder here, and I'm just going to drag in my tiered fidelity inventory data. And I'm just going to name that 2023 winter TFI. I've seen some districts that go into some detail here, but you're going to go into a lot of detail about analysis. So definitely don't put any analysis here. If you need to put some additional detail there to differentiate it from another piece of data, go ahead and do that. But don't try to put analysis or why you picked it or things like that. You're gonna get into that later. So oftentimes, what I'll do is I'll just put the same thing in both places. If somebody else has found a really valuable use for that and you want to share it, please throw it in the chat. But for me, I try to stay away from spending a lot of time on this part because we're going to do a lot of analysis with it later. Down at the bottom, you can actually say where this came from. And so this one was something that that's not in here. We don't have the tiered fidelity inventory in here as an option, so it's just other. So I'm going to go ahead and add the data set. And so now we can see that that is here in the data set, and I can view that data object. So I can see what we had uploaded for the TFI.
Dave, can I interject just one thought?
Absolutely.
That point about cherry picking is so important, because if you focused in like you had for the four charts that you showed, that's what you're going to end up looking at again when you're monitoring and adjusting. So you're not looking at that big 50. So that's so important on the back end, is to keep it very concise to what you're actually trying to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that it's kind of snowbally. So like if you put the 50-page report here, then you have to analyze 50 pages and you have to talk about 50 pages and all those things. And then later, once the goal is made and you have a 50-page report, well, you're trying to monitor 30 different things out of that. And it snowballs and it makes it, and that's where processes get abandoned. So you want to look for those efficiencies wherever you can and be very precise and succinct about the things that you're putting in.
And to go with what Mike and Dave said, like I put in the chat, don't freak out if you're like, oh, we missed this point, we needed this. You can always go back and add a data point. It's just as simple as Dave showed you there. So
yep, absolutely. And you can even do that after you've moved your
you're right. There's multiple places you can add.
All the way. So like, let's say that it's a goal that you've even worked on for years and it's been in your portfolio for years. You can always go back and add that. And so that's a great point, Hilda. So yes, I'm talking about being careful and putting the right things in and all that kind of stuff, but like, that's really to save your work later, not to say, if you mess this up now, you're out of luck. You can always go back and add more data. Thanks for pointing that out, Hilda. Thanks.
And Terry brought up a good point in the chat, just being mindful of when you are uploading your own data, that it doesn't include student names or there are like student, information, things like that, that could tie it back to specific families or demographics.
Yes, and that's oh shoot, I'm gonna upload one more thing because it actually has you sign off on that fact. Maybe you saw me click accept in there. I won't show it right now, but there's actually a checkbox. That's a great thing to reminder. And there's a kind of a reminder in MICIP about that.
Can I ask a clarifying question there? So I know that my team has access to the level of this to see the data. I know when we generate reports that we share beyond our team, that this level of detail is not included. I know that at the department level, this level is not something that department folks are checking or that kind of thing. So I know also from like a FERPA standpoint, so can you clarify for me just a little bit around, because what's happening is some of my teams have like data wall level data, right, and that's really what they're using for interim. And so when I think about how we reference that data, I know we can link it or put it in a Google Doc and can we clarify just a little around the kind of why of that and what might happen if we did that?
Yeah, so I'll give my 2 cents and then I'll let Ben and Terry weigh in on that. But yeah, there probably shouldn't be an example where, like, let's say that that you uploaded the data wall data, right? And you're like, okay, we want to move this many kids from this category to this category, right? And it was the Post-its with the kids' names on them, for example, right? So like, I have tried myself to think of the scenarios where and how might that actually become public. I myself couldn't come up with that, but I think maybe the point is that you're the one that's controlling the access for who gets into it and those sorts of things. And so the one scenario that I've been able to come up with in my mind is that you can't compartmentalize the data to say this is an elementary piece of data that we only want our elementary people to look at, and really our high school people don't need to know all these kids' names. Like, that to me is about the only scenario that I can think of where that might come into play. But I'd be glad to hear from Ben or Terry about kind of what some of the thinking was when that functionality was built in.
Yes, so when a district becomes authorized to use MICIP, they have a MICIP agreement that they have to sign. And so part of it is confidentiality of identifying students. So not only student names are a concern for FERPA and PII violations, but also when we have reports that have a very low end value, right? We only have like 3 or 4 kids. We have districts that have that. So it'd be easy to really kind of identify those students. You'll see that type of what we call suppressed data works through my school data as well. They also protect PII or personal information or FERPA violations. So you really do want to be careful. If it goes into MICIP, it does not have any personal student information in it. What you do in your district, that's a little different, because then you may be responsible for that child, and so having that personal information is fine at the local level.
Okay, thank you for that information. We'll think it through some more. Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Lindsay. All right, so once we have our data set uploaded, and again, we have those pieces in there that are really interesting to us. It's why we set this goal. It's the sort of things that we're wanting to set our end targets, our end targets or interim targets around. Then it's time to actually get into the analysis portion of this. And so this is the part where, again, working outside of the system is really beneficial. You can have data walls set up in rooms with people. If it's online, you can be sharing things in Google Docs and in Google Drives, and you can use that platform or the document that I shared earlier that Mike and Ottawa ISD put together that really kind of walks you through this outside of the system. Like Terry mentioned, if I was in this and Hilda were in it at the same time, and we were both typing at different screens, we wouldn't see each other's work here. And so there are workarounds and things like that, but the more people you have in there, the easier it is to mess it up. If you're working as a team and you're getting everything collected, I always do it outside of the platform and then basically move it. We get agreement outside of the platform, and then I kind of move it into the platform. And so this first part is just all around the initial data analysis. And so I'm just going to kind of pop back over and go through a couple of items back in the presentation. So this is where you're really describing your data set, and what you try to do is capture the conversations you're having around the data, but this is really where you're just being factual about what the data is saying. And so we're not getting into why or what could we do about it or those sorts of things. We're just really trying to identify what are those things that we're seeing in the data, and maybe specifically what are those things that we want to improve. And I remember many years ago working in school improvement, and we would make data statements about like everything. And we would end up with like pages and pages and pages of data statements. And it was really kind of doing the work for the purpose of doing the work. And so really, really work to avoid that. Really stick to those things that you're seeing some sort of inequity. You're seeing something that across the board is something that you want to improve. Stick to those pieces that are really important to you, that you're going to want to maybe set some goals around, that you're going to want to make end targets and interim targets later. And so I would also say sometimes I'm guilty of focusing on like, what are the gaps? What are the things you want to improve? You can very much so also take more of an appreciative inquiry in this. And you can look for what was something that like vastly improved, or what was a group that would typically be underperforming that suddenly was able to make improvements. So don't discount good data. That might be very informative too, or data that makes us really happy. I think it's beneficial to get those sorts of things included as well. So that's kind of more of an appreciative inquiry approach. Just know that you want to keep it focused, and you want to put things in there that are really interesting to your group. Maybe it's interesting because somebody overperformed that you thought wouldn't, or maybe it's interesting because there's a gap and there might be due to some sort of inequity. So you can see a couple of examples that we have in here. Just really keep it focused. After you do the initial data analysis is when you start to think about what are the things that we're already doing in this realm. And this can actually be a very impactful step to the whole piece. It's a time to really get in and really think about what are we already doing? Is it something that we should continue doing, or is it maybe something that we might consider making an adjustment to or even abandoning? And there are a lot of really good resources around this. So don't skimp on this part. This is a really important step. And so back in our dashboard, we have a couple of pieces here around this. So the MDE put out an initiative inventory toolkit. And so that resource is here. I'm going to pop that open in a second. And then NERN, the National Implementation Research Network, also put out a process for how to go about doing that. And so if you're going to engage in that and you haven't done one before, I recommend first reading over the NERN document, and then just to kind of understand the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. And then using the actual toolkit from MICIP, from MDE. And so again, it's in here. The different toolkits and templates are all available. And this is just like those other ones that I shared. You have to download this, and then the links are going to work for you. So it's a great step. I recommend using the MDE process and tool to do this. And there's a nice template that that actually walks you through that whole process. And it really helps you to decide, are these things important? Do we have way too many things that we're trying to do? Have we been doing some of these things for a long time and we're not seeing an improvement? What kind of changes can we make?
Dave, just one point of clarity, within the MDE toolkit, the link to NERN, which you have separated out, is also embedded within this resource right there. Yep.
Yeah, so that'll actually take you right out to the NERN process. And so they just kind of work in conjunction with each other. It's not like one says one thing and one says the other thing, but this one's really about trying to set up who's going to be on the team and what is it you're going to look into, where the MDE one has a nice template that you can actually start to put in your different initiatives, and it helps you think through the different initiatives that you have. So they kind of work in conjunction with each other. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of extra time really thinking about that that initial initiative inventory section, because it's really a pretty impactful section. There are some questions that are built in, and if you look at those questions, you'll find that those are the sorts of questions that are in the NERN and the MDE document as well. So they do try to embed some of those pieces right in the system. One other just kind of technical thing that I wanted to point out real quick. A lot of times if you go to, they might have these little link pieces where it gives you more detail. If you go there, it actually gives you the opportunity to type your response here. And when you do that, it'll actually populate it in the system. So that's just a little technical detail. It's kind of a nice piece that you don't have to leave the screen with all the questions on it to actually answer the questions here. So, so that's that initial initiative inventory analysis. That's kind of a tongue twister, actually. So, but that's a real important step piece here to really make sure you're taking that into consideration. So after that inventory is taken, it's really time to start thinking about what are the gaps that we're seeing, and like how far away from where we want to be are we right now. And I like to think of this as like current state and desired state. I think that's something that people can really kind of engage in those conversations quite a bit. And it doesn't always have to be about achievement gaps. So when we see gap, like we're kind of indoctrinated to think achievement gap. And so there's lots of different ways that there can be gaps, right? There might be a gap in systems gap, or a gap in opportunity for students. And so there's lots of ways that we can think about gaps. And so like I mentioned, I kind of like to think of this more about where are we right now and where do we want to be, that current state, desired state. And this is a great place to explore that. And the final part of our data discovery is where we actually finish up and we write a data story summary. And that's where we've had a lot of discussions previously. We identified good data to look at. We wrote some data statements. We figured out what we're already doing in this area. We identified what our gaps are. So then you kind of just pull it all together. And there are some really good consideration questions in the platform. And again, they're just right here where it says view consideration questions. You can get into that. And, so it talks about what are the strengths, what are the opportunities, are there, back to that initiative inventory, are there duplicate services and programs and supports that we're trying to use to solve the same problem? So just some really good pieces in here to really consider. And that's where you can just kind of summarize things. So I'm going to actually populate this so far off of this sample data set that we had. And so for the initial data discovery, I'm going to pop in some conversation that was had around that. I'm keeping these really super short. I have seen these that get really in depth and people have lots of conversations around them. Again, the larger the goal, the more data statements you're going to have and things like that. So I'm keeping it super simple for the purposes of today. But for the initial data analysis, the middle school, high school has a higher than county average on the ACEs and suicide ideation and several other indicators. However, the local school climate survey has a different indicator because 80% of the students agree or strongly agree that they feel safe at school. So that was just some initial analysis that they were doing around that. And then as far as initial inventory analysis, what this district did was they were working a lot with trauma-informed instruction. They were doing things with mental health and an on-site school clinician. They were working with interconnected systems framework. They have PBIS. So they're obviously doing a whole lot of things around climate and culture and mental health. And then for their gap analysis, what they came up with was that they wanted to analyze why the county and the school survey are showing different results at the middle school. And they really want to understand the emotional and social needs and improve the school climate just in general. So they were actually seeing some differences in their data and they wanted to maybe explore that a little bit further. And then finally, for their data story summary, they just kind of really looked at, they're referencing back to the school climate survey, the communication between the school and parents need to be strengthened. And then the current initiatives that are in place really need to be promoted. And there might be more valuable partners in the process. And then they need some more data to dig deeper to figure out more about their gaps. So that was just kind of just a real simple version where it was maybe a real targeted goal around just a couple of data pieces. If you think back to those different flow charts that we looked at earlier, these are all the sorts of considerations. If you're going to have one goal that's going to kind of encompass everything, there's going to be a lot of stuff that goes into analyzing the data. If you're going to break it out and into smaller goal areas, then you might get a little bit more targeted in this. So that's kind of where that local context and the way that you want your team to do work really matters. So I know we kind of moved through this section quickly, but just wanted to pause here. I don't think that I saw anything to come into chat, but just wanted to check to see if there was, it looks like Ben did put something in there. We also recommend that if something is not working, a team uses the hexagon tool to help analyze why it might not be working. So a great point there is if something isn't working the way that you thought, so we're back to that in the initial inventory analysis, if something's not working, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to abandon it, right? There might be something about why that isn't working. And we are going to get into the hexagon tool later in the context of strategy selection. But the hexagon tool was not made specifically for strategy selection. It was used to really help to identify these sorts of things and get at the problem of why maybe something isn't working the way that it is. So this is just another example that you can use this for other purposes. So Ben, thank you for making that connection.
One other point, Dave, click on view consideration questions on district data story. If you like, you can go ahead and answer each question if that's how your team functions. or you can just summarize the conversation that you have around the data that you're looking at. So kind of two different thoughts is they're guiding questions, but don't feel like you have to answer each and every question if there are extended questions to consider. Thanks, Dave.
Sure thing. As you'll see, there's a lot of like contextual stuff here. This is not like a rote process where you're going to go through and everybody's plans are going to look the same. It's very contextual. It's about your team. It's about what your district needs. It's about what you're identifying and how you want to approach it. So like I said, that can be it's very flexible, but it can also be a little bit overwhelming. So I want to give everybody time to ask questions if you had them. And then also want to invite any of our other ISD partners or MDE partners, if there was anything that you wanted to add about this whole first data discovery process, if you feel free to chime in at this time.
I would just like to add, talking to some districts that are struggling with that transition from their assist type of planning environment to the MICIP planning environment, is that when you get to your data story, this takes time because there's rich discussion that needs to be had here. So it's not a matter of just filling in the boxes in order to move on. So really take the time to go in and discuss these elements of your data story.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry. All right. I don't see any other questions popping up in the chat. I do want to leave some time at the end of the day for any specific questions that anybody might have. And there's also a feedback portion of our day that's really important that I'm going to talk into a little bit. So I'm just going to maybe talk a little bit into this next section, and then we'll pick up on the 15th, pretty much right where we left off. So we're going to go a little bit farther, but I want to leave plenty of time at the end to get some thoughtful feedback, and then also for any individual questions that anybody has. So I'm going to go ahead and just get a little bit farther today. And we're going to dig into root cause. We might not be able to get through the whole thing, but we're just going to dig into a little bit. So in this portion, we're going to talk about what root cause is all about. And then we're going to talk about the two options that are right in MICIP for you to analyze root cause. There's also lots of other options that you can use to analyze root cause. And we're also going to talk about using multiple tools. So that's kind of a lot. We'll see how far we get. And then we'll just pick up wherever we left off next time. What is root cause? So like the bullets say here, there are many, many factors behind any phenomenon. So I think the point that Ben made around, and maybe an initiative that's in place that isn't working, well, why isn't that working, right? So that's kind of what we think of when we say the causal factors. There's lots of things that behind anything, why something maybe is or isn't working, whether it's a strength or a need. And then the root cause, this comes right out of the process guide. The root cause is the primary factor that contributes to a challenge or an opportunity. It's the why behind everything. And this is really about digging in and trying to figure out the root of the problem. And so sometimes on the surface, it seems really apparent why something is occurring the way that it is. But it's super important to dig into that and see if what seems to be readily apparent is actually the case. A lot of times, if things were easy to fix, we would have fixed them a long time ago. And so in trying to take the easy fix, sometimes we're not taking the time to really dig in enough to see. So, and there's just a really great book called Learning to Improve. And my favorite quote out of it that I quote to myself often, anytime I have what I think is a great idea, is that whatever that is, it's possibly wrong and it's definitely incomplete. So, this is actually it's a very messy portion of the process because there can be lots of differing opinions around what the root cause of something is. And so it's just something that you just have to really work through with a team and It'll be something that will make the team stronger as you work together and kind of understand these processes. And this is really the mindset and the thinking around this applies to all kinds of work outside of your work with MICIP. And so if you can develop this skill as a team within the context of MICIP, you'll probably find that this comes in really handy with a lot of operational issues and other things. So I think we're definitely going to spend the time needed on this. We're not going to be able to get through it today. So wanted to talk a little bit about ladders of inference. A lot of times we kind of jump to the top of the ladder. So there's a problem and we jump straight to deciding what to do about it. And we want to take some sort of action. And when there's an emergency, please do that. Little kid is running toward the street. You don't want to analyze your data. You want to go and grab the kid. Okay. So in the case of emergency, sometimes you just need to immediately act. But what we're talking about in the context of continuous improvement, we're talking about long-term goals, sometimes long-term problems that have plagued us for many years. And so this is the time that we really want to slow down and challenge our own assumptions and challenge our own biases and the things that we already believe. And so this kind of helps us to do that. And really this is built into the MICIP process. So this available data down here, those are those data objects that you're picking for your data story, right? So there's all this available data in the world, and we're going to select the data that's important to us. We've spent a lot of time talking about that today, right? And then we're going to paraphrase and name what's going on. And that's really kind of what we did in the data story. And then now we're going to kind of evaluate what's happening. That's really this root cause portion that we're talking about now. So what we're seeing on this ladder of influence is really built into the MICIP process. So if you're following the process and you're doing what Terry said, so you're slowing down and you're taking the time to do it, then you're already going to be staying lower on the ladder and working your way up as appropriate. So like I said, these are the areas that we really were working on with the data discovery. And this is kind of like another take on the ladders of inference. There's lots of good ladders of inference references out there, but when we're explaining and evaluating what's happening, then we really have to try to keep ourselves lower on the ladder again, and really starting to understand and be able to identify when our own assumptions and beliefs and our own conclusions that we've drawn in our head are starting to impact our decision making. And so keeping the team lower down on the ladder really helps you kind of dig into that. And in fact, it can start to influence what our assumptions, our beliefs are. And so I'm not going to go too much more into the ladders of inference, but I think it's actually really pretty fascinating to think through and to recognize when you're working with people, when you can see that somebody just jumped straight to actions, or that how much their own belief system is influencing the sort of decision making they're making. So just wanted to spend a little bit of time on that. So here is the why root cause. Yeah, so when you're really digging in and you're using that ladder of inference and you're really trying to examine and come to the why something is there, then you're getting away from this piece that we call solutionitis, right? Where it's like, oh, there's this problem, let's do this. And you just start throwing it at the wall and see what sticks, right? And so this kind of helps us slow down and really think through that. So I put a couple examples here. Let's say that we're not seeing the kind of growth that we'd like to see on our benchmark assessment data. Well, it's probably because we need a new benchmark assessment product. That might be solutionitis, right? But if we actually did the root cause, we might notice that we actually need to establish an assessment team that's going to actually review and act on the data, right? So maybe we didn't have a team that would look at this and would get together after we give the assessment and would start to think about the instructional implications and those sorts of things. So, you can also apply this in an area of strength. Then you can think about what else can be emulated from that. So our outcome data improved when we bought a new curriculum. So that might be, you might jump to an assumption, right? Our NWA scores went up when we got that new curriculum. So that maybe, but in digging into it deeper, we also did a lot of professional learning and established coaching feedback cycles at the same time. So being able to kind of dig down and see and think a little bit more deeply about that. So it's like really what we want to emulate. We don't want to emulate buying a new curriculum all the time. What we want to emulate is these coaching feedback cycles that were really effective. So it really works kind of in both scenarios when you're looking for an area of improvement, or if you're trying to figure out why something worked as a strength. So at this point, I am actually going to I'm going to stop our content and we're going to pick up with the fishbone diagram and 5 whys on the 15th. However, if you could not leave yet, I really want to talk about feedback and why we really would like all of us to participate in that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for today, and we'll pick up the recording on the 15th.